most of my career, about 30 years, looking at twins and identical twins. And I got really interested in not so much the similarities, but the dissimilarities. Everyone just focused on, habits and the way you guys pick up a coffee cup or a beer or, laugh or smile. But people don't focus on things like twins getting aging at different rates or dying at different times or getting different cancers or one being depressed, one being happy, etc. So I was really fascinated to try and work out, if you could crack that in twins, it would generalize to the rest of the population because you guys are a unique natural experiment that you can only do in mice and rats.
I like mice and rats. It's great.
You're lab rats really, because you couldn't. You'd have to crossbreed humans and then get them to live in exactly the same place for a third of their life, and then see what happened to them. So it's fantastic that nature allows this to happen, and we can do these amazing experiments on real people that should inform everybody about nature and nurture and why stuff happens to us. And so that was really my.
And what were the general findings of it? Like, what was it? Was it that lifestyle and obviously epigenetics resulted in different predisposition towards certain chronic diseases?
The average, if you just look across, hundreds of diseases, it's about 50-50.
Okay. Between nature and nurture.
Genetic. 50% nurture, 50% nature.
Wow.
Or 50% genetics, 50% environment. And there are a few exceptions, but broadly that's around it. But for things like aging, the rate of aging or age-related disease, it was less. And things like cancer, it's much less. It's around 20% genetics and 80% environment. So that was always interesting. So I was trying to look for what was different about identical twins that would explain this, because your clones, you have the same genes, the same DNA in every cell in your body, and you virtually had identical lifestyles for a couple of decades. So any differences between you could be really significant. And we looked at epigenetics first, because obviously the genes are the same, but these little chemicals that can sit on top of your genes that can switch them on and off. And in that book, Identically Different, I did sort of discuss a few ideas about why that made some twins different. And it might be due to emotional traumas or big things that happen in the life of kids, particularly, that send them on different pathways, which could be due to these little chemicals which can change personality or other areas. But those differences were relatively small. So there were a few anecdotes. In that book, I did look at, for example, at homosexuality and why identical twins often are discordant for sexuality, which is kind of weird as well.
Wow.
As in one was heterosexual and one might be homosexual.
Yeah, which you wouldn't expect to be very common, but it is quite common. And that was fascinating. So thinking there might have been some change, or in the womb, again, some of these epigenetic signals, these little chemicals are just changed around. And I think really interesting philosophical to think, well, we could have been, someone quite different, but for a few chemicals floating around at different times. And same is true for diseases as well, or autoimmune disease or things like this. So that was fascinating to me. But I then I came across, I guess, around that same time, about 12 years ago, the idea of the microbiome. And I was fascinated to see if this community of microbes in our gut were similar or different in twins. Were they mainly genetic? Did you acquire them and, they followed you around because you had the right genes? That means that, they liked your intestines, and more than someone else's, so they stuck with them. In which case, identical twins should have identical microbiomes. And it turns out that you don't. You really only slightly genetic. You're only slightly more similar than unrelated people, which is really interesting.
Wow, that we're not ridiculously similar. I wonder if this is true, because I had lunch with a friend, and he was a scientist of the microbiome, and he said that I'm like, as identical twins, he said I'm probably more microbial, similar to my wife, because we share the same home, the same environment, we sleep in the same bed. And you're probably more identical, like Stephen being my identical twin, he's more identically, like microbiome is more identical to his wife because they live in different homes. Is that correct?
That is probably correct. Yeah, we've done studies on that with twins, and certainly the household is really important, and even your dog. You'll share microbes with your dog.
Yeah, I've got a cat.
I think are really important. So if you share wives and dogs, then it gets more similar. But,
we don't, just to clarify.
We won't go down on this one. That's the late night one. So for me, a big aha moment in this science career was finding out that identical twins like you had very different gut microbiomes. So suddenly, I had a mechanism by which, all these common diseases, even personality traits, and it could be explained by having different microbes, because of this new understanding of what the gut microbes are, which really they're like a new organ in the body which produces chemicals. They're like a massive chemical factory. And if that factory is different, you're going to be producing different chemicals to your brother.
That sit on top of the genes and therefore influence epigenetics.
Yeah, there's 500 times more genes in your gut microbes than there are in your cells. So we have a much bigger catalog, if you like, of chemicals we can produce from our gut microbes in response to food than we have inherently in our bodies. And that's why we've co-evolved. So we've got this huge extra diversity that's been given to us by in a way forming a little home for our gut microbes. So that's really interesting. So in a way, twins are much less similar than we thought they were before we discovered gut microbes 10 years ago. And I think, you guys probably know more than anyone that you are more different than people think you are. And everyone assumes you're just these clones that do everything the same way. And I think now you've got a bit of science to explain why that is, you can eat the same foods. And we did this with the Zoe Predict studies. You will react very differently. So often you react differently to the same stress. And part of that is because all these chemicals you're producing are going to be different. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, it really, really is. Yeah. Like the gut being an additional organ that influences every aspect of your life, really. And it's only been the last kind of 10 to 20 years, really, that the whole microbiome, how it's really being considered another organ and influencing every aspect of health, not just kind of your immune system, where most of your gut cell, your immune system cells are in your gut, but your mental health. I wonder if you could talk about the importance of like the gut in terms of mental health, because some, like mental health, obviously massive epidemic in terms of, our well-being and anxiety levels and all these type of things. And most of us will blame it on stress and external stimulants, but we live in an obesogenic environment, which is, there's so much ultra-processed foods around, and this is the easy choice. The easy choice is to eat ultra-processed foods, particularly if we're stressed. And I wonder, it's the correlation between the gut microbiome and mental health. There's loads of links there now. That's...
Yeah, no, you're right. It's growing every week as we get more data on this. I think we all knew that, we've always known, and ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine has always put the gut at the center of everything anyway, and that particularly that, our mental health, and we know about, when we're stressed, we get butterflies, we get, gut feelings, exams, you might be running to the toilet all the time, some people. So there's always been this connection between stress and our guts. But the microbiome has really started to explain why that is, because we have in our gut, as well as all these immune cells, we've got all these nerve cells. So if you put them all together, it's the same size as a cat's brain. So, it's our second brain is actually along the lining of our guts. And we never knew why that was, a bit of a waste of nerve cells. But it turns out there's this huge correlation so that the gut microbes are communicating with those nerve cells all along the gut wall. And there's this big nerve that goes from the gut all the way to the brain called the vagus nerve. And that is another way they communicate. They also produce lots of brain chemicals. So the chemicals that are important for, say, being depressed or happy, serotonin, most of it is made in your gut by your gut microbes and then transported towards your brain, as is other ones called GABA, which are chemicals that are released when you take Valium. So these are natural anti-anxiolytics that your gut microbes produce. So we're finding out more and more that all these chemicals are really can interact with your brain and change your mood, change your appetite, and may be responsible for hunger, these hunger signals that many people who are overeating get, and will interact with your food. And there's lots of studies now that are showing not only that probiotics can help things like depression and anxiety, but actually shifting people to a gut-friendly Mediterranean diet has an even bigger effect than antidepressants.
That was the SMILES research. I remember reading about that in New Zealand. That kind of took two cohorts, one that both teenage kids that suffer with depression, and they put one on a high fiber diet, a more Mediterranean based diet, and the other one they gave them, I think it was antidepressants, and they tracked them both over a period of time. I think it was counseling and antidepressants, and I think they found that the food was as effective, if not more.
Yeah, they were all on it. I think most were on antidepressants anyway. But it was in addition to that, and that's but it had got a dramatic effect, because antidepressants work very well in some people, but they don't work very well in many others. And other studies have shown that whether they work or not depends on your gut microbes. And it comes back to this idea that everybody has a unique set of gut microbes. And it means that one size fits all approaches, whether it's through your standard diet or even doses of medication, etc., really often don't apply well. And so we've seen that most of the drugs studied so far have an interaction with your gut microbes. So it explains why some people, don't respond to antidepressants, why some people don't respond to some heart tablets, and even things like painkillers like paracetamol. Some people prefer ibuprofen to paracetamol. It's about the gut microbes, whether they're breaking it down. So we're learning more and more about how important these guys are really in every chemical we put into our bodies.
We've become Instant Pot ambassadors. Amazing kitchen appliance that's going to make it easier for you to cook healthy, save money, and save time.
It literally rethink the way you cook. You literally pop a whole lot of ingredients in it, and then you've got hands-off cooking. Like, I'll put a whole lot of ingredients in, and then I can go do what I want and come back in 30 or 50 minutes later and the dinner's cooked.
It's a great way. Many people are kind of afraid of a pressure cooker, but this is a new kind of advanced. It takes away the worry from pressure cooking. Because you're cooking in one pot, you literally only have one pot to clean up. And it's a beautiful way to have 6 portion capacity, so it's easy to cook for the family.
Yeah, it's so simple to use, even for a novice home cook. I genuinely use it all the time. I make oat groats in the morning, I make dals, I make chilies, I make curries, and literally when I'm making the girls' lunch boxes, I'll pop a whole lot of ingredients in and schedule it to come on for when I come home and dinner's ready. Like, it's a no-brainer. We're working with them. They've given an exclusive discount.
Where do people find out details?
They'll find out details on the show notes for this episode. It's called the Instant Pot Duo Plus Whisper Quiet. It's their latest model. It's amazing. I use it genuinely. I use it all the time. I'm not joking.
Link in our show notes. Time to pay the bills now.
As we said, this podcast is sponsored by Vivo Barefoot Shoes. They're the only shoes we've been wearing for 6 years. And really, we wouldn't take someone as a sponsor unless we really believe in them. And this is a company, and these are shoes that we've seen it in ourselves. Our feet have become more natural. They're stronger.
They're wider. I can isolate. There's this kind of movement called toga, which sounds funny and sounds stupid, but it's where you can isolate your toes and move them kind of individually, and through wearing shoes, at least there's even research from Vivo at universities that your feet muscles will typically improve by 60% within a number of weeks of just wearing barefoot
within
shoes.
100 days.
Within 100 days.
So, and even think about it logically, that in a house, the foundation or the base of the house is the most important bit which the structure sits on. And the same way we just wear shoes without thinking about it, yet our feet are the foundation. And when you've got them in shoes that actually encourage the natural kind of movements within your feet, it enhances every aspect of your anatomy.
Yeah. So if anyone does want to try them out, Vivo Barefoot are offering a 15% off with the code HappyPear15, and you have nothing to worry about. They're offering a 100-day return policy. So if you don't like your Vivo Barefoot, you can return them free of charge.
Yeah, so check them out, vivobarefoot.com, full range of shoes for all the family, from formal to casual to kids, and everything in between. So 15% off, HappyPear15.
When I was growing up, I only had one friend that I knew of, and obviously I didn't know that many people, but I only had one friend who had an allergy. He was allergic to eggs, and I remember he couldn't eat eggs. If he ate eggs, Hugh Cahill was nearly going to blow up, that type of way. But now when my children go to school, every class, there's no nuts in the school, there's this person allergic to this, that, the other.
Kiwis,
like
strawberries.
Allergies are pervasive, and I'm just curious about as we have moved into a more complex, sterile society, we're not exposed to as much biodiversity of microorganisms. As a result, our microbiomes are probably less diverse, and as a result, there's probably a correlation between that and allergens. Or is this just a strange hypothesis?
Yeah, it was not that strange. 1969, Man on the Moon was the first medical report of a food allergy.
Wow.
1969.
Yeah.
What was it? What were they allergic to? Space.
I think it might have been, I think it was shellfish or something. It was, and so, when I was at school, I mean, I'm older than you guys, nobody had allergy. I never heard of it. And it was only when I was about 20 or so, and I met some American guy who, had carried an EpiPen. That was the first time I'd ever encountered anybody. And so food allergies are novel for humans. And I think something has to have changed in the last 50 years quite dramatically. And the number one thing that's changed is our diet. Ultra processed foods, reducing fiber, sterile foods, which have lots of chemicals in them, I think is one factor. The other is, we're living in cities. We're not getting as dirty as much. We're not playing in the garden and getting muddy. We're not mixing with animals as much, although, I see you are mixing with your dog. And we also take many more antibiotics than we did 50 years ago. So the average 20-year-old has about 18 courses of antibiotics by the time they get there. So if you combine, junk foods, antibiotics, moving into cities, that probably explains why we've lost about half of the species that we had 50 to 100 years ago, and all our ancestors had. And when we compare ourselves to hunter-gatherers, we see that big difference. So I think that lack of species means we probably aren't getting the chemicals to keep our immune system in top form. And it means that it's overreacting to certain foods as well. So that's why we get this imbalance, and why our ancestors didn't, because they were perhaps might have been getting more infections as well, minor infections. Their immune system was much better trained than ours. And so we're jumping at the sight of a little mouse, whereas in the past, we'd have dealt with that very easily. And that's probably where this allergy is coming from. And it does seem to occur, interesting, less in deprived families and less in large families. So if you've got a big family from a deprived background, you will get less allergies than if you're a single kid in an affluent neighborhood. So it is interesting. It's very sad that we need to look at and see how our modern living is giving us new diseases that we hadn't thought about.
And then can we turn that around? Like, can suddenly say, for example, you said over the last 100 years, we've lost approximately 50% of our microbial biodiversity. Can suddenly decide, okay, I'm going to start eating more fiber-rich foods, more fermented foods. I'm going to spend time outside. I'm going to have loads of animals. I'm going to actually have a zoo, and I'm going to work in the zoo. It's going to be wonderful. I'm going to bathe in dirt, and I'm going to spend time outside in different ecosystems. Can one suddenly increase their microbial diversity massively and significantly?
And therefore influence every aspect of their health?
You can get a long way there. Yes. I don't think I'll ever get to the state of a Hadza hunter-gatherer.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, and some of my colleagues have tried poo transplants from them, and that didn't work.
Wow.
But when I spent a week with them, I did get more species.
Well, that was in Tanzania, was it?
I was in Tanzania. I got 40% more species, but they were short-lived.
And
I couldn't keep them. I couldn't keep them there.
And were you like wandering around Tanzania, like, living their lifestyle, going?
Yeah, we were camping next to them and eating exactly the same food as they did for a week. So, it was short term. But as soon as I got back on the plane, had airplane food in its sterile packaging or whatever, I was back to where I started from. But seriously, I think a lot of our studies are showing, I now work with this company, Zoe, that I co-founded, and we've got 100,000 people's microbiomes now. And people who do improve their diets, improve their diversity, the number of species, quite considerably. So, and other people with other studies have shown short term that just in a couple of weeks, you can significantly improve your ratio of good to bad bugs and diversity. So I think we can get a long way back there, but whether we've killed off some of these guys forever, so they no longer exist in humans, so it's hard to get them, I think we have to accept that. But if we can get perhaps half of the way back to where we were, which is still a major improvement on where we are now.
Yeah.
And if we all got to where the best person is, because even within, in the UK, Ireland, there's a huge range between the worst and the best. And if we just aspire to be the best within our population, we'd be doing pretty well.
Yeah, because I know from the British Gut Project and the American Gut Project, you found that diversity was one of the main, the main things which you can do as an individual to improve your own microbial health. And even, a few minutes ago, you mentioned three things. You mentioned like ultra processed foods are one of the big, our modern food system is really affecting our microbiome. The cities, and then antibiotics, like trying to avoid unnecessary antibiotics. And I just wondered, in terms, is there a weighting across those three? Like, is food spending more time in nature, or avoiding unnecessary antibiotics? Is there a kind of weighting, or is it personalised again? It's very much in line with some of
Well, you can only talk on average. But if you're on average from the epidemiology studies, food is number one. You will get some individuals who've had a lot of antibiotics and, had problems with it. But overall, if we improved our food, and I think this is the empowering bit, because, the most important health choices we make every day are our food choices. And if we did learn to make better ones, we would all improve our health and our gut microbiomes. And I think that's the important thing. It's, most of us have had our antibiotics. We can blame our parents or the school or whatever it was, or the doctors. Hard to change that. And we may need them to save our life in the future. Obviously, we can't all go and live as hermits, living in a barn with animals all the time. We can do a little bit of that, going out at weekends and, gut, or even gardening and things, which is good for your gut microbes. But the one thing, the most important thing, and the thing we can change every day rapidly, is improving what we eat. And that will have a really rapid effect.
And the kind of the foundation of that is to increase more fiber-rich foods, because fiber is the ultimate. People are obsessed with a probiotic, but fiber is ultimately the prebiotic. Isn't that true?
Well, it's a combination of factors. So, I mean, I always say this, 5 key elements to improving your gut microbes. One is to eat a diversity of plants and from the British Gut Project, we came up with this 30 plants a week, which, and that includes nuts and seeds and herbs and spices, just to give variety to produce lots of microbial species and fiber, because if you have 30 a week, you're going to get the fiber without counting it. Then the other one is Eat the Rainbow. So you're getting all the colorful plants, but also you're getting things you may not have thought of as healthy, like coffee, extra virgin olive oil, dark chocolate, even some small amounts of alcohol like red wine, because they're very, very tannic and they have those high polyphenols, but berries and nuts and seeds. And then fermented foods is the third one. Regular fermented foods, not once a week, but several times a day, and try and get more than just yogurt, because there's many more out there. Give your microbes a rest at night. Just like you, they need to relax. And when they do relax, when they're not eating food, they will be repairing your gut wall. They'll be having a sort of repair team comes out at night, just like you have different teams in American football. It's a whole new team comes out when you stop eating. And so you've got to give them the chance to do their repair work, clean up your gut wall, and get you metabolically in a really good shape. And then finally, it's stop eating ultra-processed food with all those chemicals that have emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, preservatives that are really interfering with your gut microbes and making them send off all kinds of weird chemical signals that you don't want. So that's the 5-point plan. And I think if you can do most of those things most days, you'll be on the right track.
What I really like about it is that it's not prescriptive. It's not like, the way food can often be religious with people having, I'm ketogenic, I'm a blah, 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 whatever label you want to be. But it's very, it sounds like it's baggy enough that people go, okay, well, it's to eat 30 plants a week, eat probiotics, eat the rainbow, and
eat fermented foods.
Yeah, eat fermented foods.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying to anyone, don't eat meat or don't eat fish or don't eat eggs. Once you've got that base, you can do what you like. And our studies haven't shown big differences. As long as you can eat that range of plants, on top of that, if you've got a particular preference for things, that's fine. And, and sometimes, maybe you have to have the odd bit of ultra-processed food in order to enjoy all those plants, you may be someone who has to have a bit of mayonnaise on something, but I don't mind as long as you're getting those plants in. And, we're eating 60% of our calories as ultra-processed food. So even if we get that down to 20%, that's still going to be really good. So I think we don't want to be talking about absolute amounts. And also I like the 80-20 rule, if you can do this 80% of the time, it's going to be sustainable for your life. And this is really what I think the emphasis of my books are, and also the company Zoe is, we're not after a quick fix here. We're trying to change people's idea about eating and what healthy food is, and make that sustainable for the rest of their lives. So they'll always look at food differently and won't be beat up if they, go to a party and, they drink too much alcohol and have some, crisps and snacks and whatever, and don't fast and do everything wrong. It doesn't matter. As long as you see this as a long-term journey, that you're doing more and more of that. And it's combating this idea of these food religions and the calorie counters and I'll never do this, I'll never do that. I think it's really a different way of thinking about food, and it's great. And I think, we're getting great responses to the people who have done it, because they do see it as a way of life rather than there's just some restrictive diet that, works for 3 months, then fails miserably.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's really inclusive, which is the key to any change.
Yeah, we've certainly been plant pushers for the last 20 years, and our main mantra has always been to eat more veg, because it's a bit like it is applicable no matter what your food philosophy is.
I think it was hard to have a message without really the science to back it up. And I think once you start giving people a reason to eat veg, other than saying, it's great to be veggie or vegan, which appeals to some people, but probably not the majority, then it makes it a lot easier because they, and I think this idea that if you eat lots of plants, you're nurturing your own internal jungle or garden, and that, all these other little animals depend on you for what you put in there. And you can start teaching children that, and you can start getting that idea out. People will stop putting any old crap in their mouth and hoping that, it's going to boost them just because it's got, added protein on the label.
Yeah. On that note, and like, as I've seen you, lots of different, you do some wonderful videos on social media, and one that I saw recently, which you did, I think with Steve Bartlett, was protein and fat. Because, we live in a protein obsessed society. For some reason, protein is associated with being more macho or being stronger, or being muscly, or being, I don't know historically where it has come from, but we live in a society where it's obsessed with protein. And I've seen you have a really interesting stance in that you're talking about. Often that protein is converted into, and the body stores it as fat, which is contrary to what most people would assume.
Yeah, because you can't store protein. That's the key. So you don't sort of keep it for a rainy day when, you just happen to turn up in the gym and you can use it and you get big muscles. So this is a huge misconception, and that, but the food industry have locked into that, our ignorance about protein, and sort of trying to pretend we're all protein deficient. That's why we're not beefed up enough and, looking too puny and morally feeble. And, so we need protein. And, the idea is that, when you have sugars, you use it. And if it's not used up, it gets converted to fat. Unless you're using it in long-term energy, it will get converted to fat and stored in the body, and that's our survival mechanism. And protein is not very efficient, so you don't, as an energy source, but you'll only use it if your body needs it at that moment or in the next few hours, to help synthesize new muscle protein or rebuild, general repair work, but we don't need very much of it. And so most of us are having nearly double the amount we need anyway from our normal food. And so by taking these extra proteins, whether it's in powders, snack bars, or steaks, we are not using it. So it gets broken down into these little fractions that actually get converted back to sugars and then to fats. So people think, I never get fat by eating protein. They do. So that's the big, you either pee it out or it goes onto your belly, but most of it's not going into your bicep.
Wow.
And then in terms of protein, like, say, minimum requirement approximately around 10% of calories, and people are probably getting around 20%. Would that be roughly accurate, or is it?
Roughly, yes. I mean, it all depends on the age, but so I think it's possible that about 5% of the whole population are not getting enough protein. Most of those are elderly people who are not eating very much, but young people who are eating plenty of food will be getting, a lot of their protein from things like grains, or just by eating a bit of spaghetti, or having some beans, baked beans, or whatever it is. There's protein in many things that we don't think about, in yogurt, in eggs. And so the only people might need to worry, if you are a vegan bodybuilder, for example, and you're not really careful with what you're eating, yeah, you might need some extra protein. If you are a 75-year-old lady who wants to keep exercising and build up her muscle, but she also wants to lose weight at the same time, then she might worry. Everyone else is probably getting at least double what they need already. And I think that's the lesson. So I think it's this blanket promoting advertising saying we must have more protein and protein is healthy and there's no downside to it is just showing how susceptible we are to advertising and marketing in this area, and how we don't have the people really to tell us what's going on. And, you know, in a few years later, we'll feel like mugs again, having been conned by the food industry, just like they fooled us with low-fat foods and, you know, low diet drinks and artificial sweeteners and all these things that they persuaded us we needed were much better for us, but turned out not to be.
Wow. Yeah, it's mad. Like, it really is. And you talked there about the food industry, and I want to bring it back to, like, it's very difficult. Like, your work is amazing. Like, it really, really is. Like, all the books you've written, like your most recent book is incredibly detailed, and all your books are incredibly detailed. And, I feel like as anyone who's kind of an advocate for eating better, eating more plants, eating, you know, adopting healthy lifestyle choices, it's very difficult because the environment doesn't necessarily support this. And a bit like everyone is eating protein, like most people are eating protein stuff because they think that's what, well, obviously we just need more protein. You know, that's what everyone's doing. It's a cultural kind of mindset shift. So I'm kind of just thinking bigger and kind of going, well, how do we as a society, like our society is not set up for us to be healthy. Like, you look at the blue zones, I know you know Dan Buettner, you look at the longest living people on the planet, and they live really long because their environment, the easy choice, the healthy choice is the easy choice. Whereas nowadays, as you said, most of us live in cities. And in cities, there's processed foods, there's busy lives, there's, you know, we tend to just ultra processed feeds proliferate. And I'm wondering, what can we do? Like, I know you've got Zoe, which is obviously you're really coming at it from your perspective, but I'm thinking more as a society, how can we change this? How can we do something about it that's not just about trying to convert one individual to eat better because they feel sick or whatnot?
Yeah, well, this is the real problem, but I think you've got to put it in perspective. So, you know, the UK, Ireland, and the USA are leading the world in ultra-processed foods. I mean, maybe a bit of competition from Australia, but you know, the English-speaking world is really leading the way in ultra-processed foods. So we're around 60% of all our calories are taken with these highly industrial food-like substances. And you compare it to other countries in Europe, France, Italy, Spain, Greece, not necessarily rich countries, they're down at about 15%.
15%?
Okay, so we're having 15. So we're eating 4 times more than countries that are maybe not as rich as us or equivalent to us. So it's clearly a cultural change that's different, which means that it's quite possible for us to move back to that level without involving a lot of money. And it's a question of how do we get ourselves out of this mess that's really been brought up by the usual thing of, you know, UK, US driving, capitalism, free markets, no nanny state, you know, give them cigarettes, give them alcohol, see what happens, you know, we shouldn't interfere. With a vacuum of a lack of food culture. In the Mediterranean countries, they have local markets. They don't use supermarkets as much. Everyone wants to get fresh produce, and people know how to cook. And so it goes to a lot of education. Now, once you're in this mess, the question is, how do you get back to reasonable levels? How do you get back below 20% ultra-processed food? And I think you do need government interventions. You do need not only labeling on foods, to start labeling them as potentially dangerous, like you have on alcohol and cigarettes. And it's not unlike the situation we had in the 1980s with passive smoking. The food, you know, the cigarette industry, the food industry, they're trying to say, well, our stuff isn't that bad. You know, the research it's all a bit misleading. It's not conclusive. It's epidemiology, blah, 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 trying to muddy the water. And they've got billions to spend on, you know, influencing politicians and making sure that nothing changes. So we're fighting that. But I think making ultra-processed food visibly out there as this can potentially harm your health, by all means have it. I'm not for banning anything. But I think you should tell people the honest truth. And there's now very, very good data that if you eat ultra processed food rather than the whole food equivalent, it will make you overeat by 25%. Now, if that was on every pack, a warning, this food will make you 25% hungrier than eating something else, and you'll eat 25% more by the end of the day or tomorrow, and that's why you're going to get fat. I think it would reduce levels to Mediterranean levels, so 20%. People would say, okay, I'm having this as a treat, but I'm not having this every day because I realize this is my problem. I'm getting addicted to this stuff. These chemicals are, brilliantly fiddling on my mind or my gut, however they're doing it, and I'm going to avoid it. So labeling, honesty and transparency about the latest research. I would be putting a tax on it, just as you do on cigarettes and alcohol. And with that tax, I'd be subsidizing cooking in schools. I'd be subsidizing fresh fruit and vegetables, making school dinners really healthy and not and hospital food healthy, all the institutions. That's really what I would be doing. But I think a lot of it is education and realizing that this costs all of us money. So all taxpayers are paying for the profits of the food industry because we don't link them up with health.
Geez, here, you got my vote, Tim Spector.
Yeah, Tim for president.
Tim for president.
Yeah, defo. Brilliant. When are you running?
Politicians don't listen to me, unfortunately, so I'm not a very good politician.
Well, you don't have enough big paychecks, possibly. You mentioned there was two things there that really.
One thing that I absolutely just wanted to stop just to say there, sorry to interrupt, Dave, is that you called processed foods food-like substances. I love that, and I think that's a huge paradigm shift to see rather than seeing these things as actual foods that are nourishing. These are just food-like substances that deliver a quick dopamine hit but cost your health.
Yeah, and they're created in laboratories and factories, and they don't contain any of the original ingredients. They're just, composites of them stuck together, high pressurized, glued together, baked, and they come out looking vaguely like food. And we're fooled by that. And, the scientists that make them are brilliant. And but edible food-like substances is what we should be regarding it as. Yeah,
I love edible food-like substances. Brilliant. You mentioned there was one thing there. You mentioned two things which really jumped at me. One was label reading. So label reading. I walked in the supermarket and every food in the supermarket is trying to trick me to buy it. Like I look at the front of them, natural, and it says something like the front of it is trying to trick me into buying it. And I'm wondering, could you give anyone listening some just basic tips for label reading? Because our philosophy has always been buy as much as you can from the vegetable section, from where it's unpackaged. But obviously, all of us go into the middle section of the supermarket, which is all the processed foods. What are some kind of just basic tips for label reading?
If it's got packaging and it's got a health claim on it, it's probably ultra processed food. That's the number one tip. So if they have to say something about it, you don't have a health claim on an apple, do you? So, it's pretty obvious. Then beneath that, natural means nothing. It has no meaning at all. And if it says high in protein, that's rubbish. If it says low fat, that's probably harmful for you. If it says, high in fiber, it doesn't mean very much because you only need tiny amounts of fiber to get that claim. If it's got added vitamins and minerals, it's because they've stripped them all out in the first place. And these added ones, may be totally inappropriate. So in general, if it says low in sugar, you'd be very suspicious that it contains massive amounts of chemicals, artificial sweetness, which mess up your gut microbes. So in general, anything with a health claim, really look at the back of the label. It's a big red warning sign. Good food doesn't need health claims on them. And the sort of health claims people are allowed to, they're ridiculous anyway. Many of them are out of date. People add zinc to food just because you can claim something about the immune system in it, although the studies were done 30 years ago and were totally wrong. But so they'll add zinc to your food just so they can get a health claim on that. It is nonsense. And you can't have a health claim interesting about probiotics, although, we realize fermented foods are good for you.
Yeah. Well, what about the nutritional table? Like, so say claims the front, 100% agree. Say nutritional table, I turn around and I go, right, I want to look at the facts. The ingredients in the nutritional table. Ingredients, I've heard you say before, try to make it ones that you recognize and, know more than 20, like less than 20 ingredients. And I just wondered terms of...
Maybe less
than 10, is it?
Yeah, I mean, 20 is definitely ultra-processed. So, as little as possible.
Yeah,
good food should have 3 or 4, so...
And what about say fiber per 100 grams or sugar per 100 grams? Any kind of guidelines around that?
Yeah, I mean, fiber is really important to look at, and it's often not on the front of the pack because it's not compulsory. Because we're still in the age where we're obsessed with fat and sugar, and they can get around that with processing. So they're actually pretty irrelevant. If it contains a lot of sugar, that for many things that is important. And just remember that 4 grams of sugar is a teaspoon. So if something's got 12 grams of sugar in it, that's 3 teaspoons you'd be putting in a drink or whatever. It's far too much. So fiber is the number thing I look at, and working out how much you're getting. Maybe the fiber to sugar ratio is probably the thing to do. But people should also look at protein and, what you get in normal foods in protein, and things like beans and lentils have really high protein levels that would surprise people, so they wouldn't need to buy all this other shit. So I think that's really important. So yeah, fiber should be front of the pack, and virtually all the ultra-processed foods have really low levels of fiber. They just find it very hard to deal with real food in their factories to stick it together. So they use starches and glues and emulsifiers, gums, all these things to make it up. So everyone should be looking at fiber. But in the future, what I hope is, and we are sort of moving in that direction with Zoe, is to try and get gut health scores so that each food actually has a food score. So I think in the future, we will be having QR codes that people can actually look and see what independent people think of this food and what's actually in it, and also how it might affect you or me. And we're not, as we know from the Zoe studies, we're all rather different, whether we respond to sugars or fats, and what our gut health is like. So that's where I see the future. But a lot of it is in the label, but we've got to get rid of this obsession with sugars, fats, which the industry love because they can get around that with chemicals.
And would fiber be like more than 7 grams per 100 grams? Would that be a guiding principle, or 10 grams per 100 grams?
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, 10 is probably too much, but more than 5.
I think you've got to look at a more holistic picture. The key is you want to be eating a whole range of different foods, and they're not all going to have minimum amounts of fiber. We currently have, in the UK, it's around, average person has about between 15 and 20 grams of fiber. And we should be having 30 to 50 grams of fiber. So 95% of us is deficient in fiber. But I don't think you should demonize a food because it only had, 8% of fiber in it, if it's otherwise a healthy food, because it's got other things in there. So again, we don't want to be too reductionist about this. The idea is, the key is, at the end of the day, what's on your plate? Have you balanced things out so that if you've got something that's super tasty but low fiber, an egg, for example, is perfectly nutritious but doesn't really have any fiber. You wouldn't throw that out because it doesn't have fiber. You say, okay, let's have an egg in there because I've got something else on there, maybe some beans or some lentils, that are high in fiber. And so it's about this holistic view, whether it's on your plate, by the end of the day, what have you eaten? Have you got your 30 to 50 grams of fiber by the end of the day? That's what I'm more worried about. So it's just about, we mustn't just take this to the next extreme and start demonizing low fiber foods in the same way we did high fat foods.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, but if you are in there and buying a bread, for example, then do look at fiber. If you within a category, pick the one that's highest. Yeah. And your supermarket may not stock the best breads. And okay, it means don't give up, but do try and pick the highest one. And if everyone did that, we'd bring up the levels. Everyone would be requesting high fiber bread, not the rubbish the ultra processed rubbish that most people don't believe, don't think about. But that's 11% of our ultra processed food comes from supermarket breads.
Wow. Geez, yeah, because
that's the first thing to cut out, or to at least pick the very best of the worst,
Yeah, because supermarket bread is definitely not, like we have an organic sourdough bakery, which all our breads have 3 ingredients. There's organic flour, most of it's come from regenerative, there's water and there's salt, whereas you go to a supermarket and there can be 25 ingredients with a best before date of 6 weeks' time.
It's shocking. But, we need to educate people. They've not been told that this is a problem. They've been told it's healthy, and that just because it looks brown with a few seeds on it, it's got to be super healthy. But they're not looking at the ingredients list, And but if you go to a bakery, they don't have an ingredients list. So if they bake it on the premises of the supermarket, you don't even know what's in it. And they're not baking it; they're just heating up the frozen one that's been there for 2 years.
Yeah.
So But it's not easy to get this. It took me 6 years to write the book Food for Life.
It's massive.
There's a lot of detail in there because you have to do a lot of digging. People don't tell you this stuff.
Yeah. We've been in the food industry for 20 years, and unless you're in it, you aren't aware of just how, you're going around following your animal instincts, going, that tastes really good, that tastes good, that tastes good, and following your tastes. Yet if you follow your tastes, you become the product of this environment, which is typically disease is a product at some point, just from eating so much processed foods and the way we live nowadays.
Fermented foods, Tim, you're a huge advocate. I've seen you do your fridge fermented kimchi. You do you're a huge advocate. You kefir in the morning. You're wonderful. I wonder if we could talk about fermented foods. Just before we were doing a beetroot kvass, and love kind of lactic acid fermentation. I think it's a wonderful thing. And traditionally, my wife is Polish, and when I go stay with her parents, they grow a lot of their own veg, and they will always have a massive, like a 25 kilo tub or liter tub of kabushka or sour cabbage or sauerkraut in the cellar, and they will eat it all year round, and it's always on the table. And then there's fermented or pickled cucumbers, and it's such a part of their life. And originally this was a means of preserving food, whereas nowadays it's a health food. Beyond it meaning food preservation, it's food that brings a variety of microorganisms, which is important for our gut health and our immune system and overall health.
Was that a question, or was
but I wonder if we could talk about fermented foods and how much you're an advocate for them.
Well, it sounds like you are as well.
Oh,
so
I love them.
We're all fermented foodies. No, but yes. I mean, most people, know about yogurt, know about cheese, but I think we need to get more and more people moving to the next level. And once you realize that there's 2 or 3 different species in cheese and yogurts. But if you go to the next level, you're getting 10 to 40 different species in things like real kefir, or at least homemade kefirs, kombuchas with fermented teas. You've got the sauerkrauts you mentioned, which is one of the easiest things to make. I've got some videos out there just showing how super easy, you can do it. It's 5 minutes. You get a cabbage, you chop it up, you put it with some, 2% salt, add a bit of water, add a few seeds, done. And in a week or so, you've got your stuff, which in the fridge will last for 3 months. So people need to learn this because we used to all know this. A couple of generations ago, this was routine before fridges. Everyone had to store their stuff. And now we throw it away. If we have too much cabbage at the bottom of our drawer, we throw it away. We could conserve this and keep it. And it's super healthy. All the studies are now showing that people who eat regular fermented foods, particularly if you can get above about 3 portions a day, has a real impact on your immune system. And a lot of the studies were bad in the past. They were small, little, tiny studies, but there's now really good ones. And, we're doing a big citizen science project with Zoe, getting about 20,000 people to start eating fermented foods for 3 weeks and see if they can get up to, 5 portions a day of varied ones. And that can include these kombuchas, fruit kefirs, all these things. And people say to me, oh, it's expensive. And it is in the shops expensive. And there are some fakes in the shops. But if you make it yourself, it's incredibly cheap. And it's actually really easy. There's a sort of mindset, oh, I don't want to do bugs. What happens if I get it wrong? I'm going to die. People are reluctant to do this, but all our ancestors did it and they survived. And I think we should all embrace it. Certainly, I have several portions of fermented food every day, and I'm finding innovative ways of adding it to my cooking all the time. And I think we've got to sort of reverse the clock and look to populations like Poland and Eastern Europe or other countries where a lot of this stuff came from and start using it again. We've really lost a trick. But luckily, I started talking about this. I remember when my book, The Dark Myth, came out about six or so years ago. Nobody had heard of kefir and kombucha in England, and it's in every supermarket now. So the good thing about our part of the world is we can change how quickly things happen, and we've got a food culture that does shift quickly. So I think we've got a chance there to do good stuff.
Yeah, Tim, this has been brilliant. You're so inspiring. You genuinely are.
I wonder if you could talk briefly just about Zoe, just for people interested, because I know you're now offering
personalised
nutrition at large,
even for identical twins.
Yeah. So for people who want to learn more about personalised nutrition and learning about your gut and getting your own scores, joinzoe.com is the website to go to. It might be zoe.com soon, but joinzoe.com is available in the US and the UK, or if you've got an address there, you can get started. And it's a glucose monitor, it's a blood fat test, and it's a gut microbiome test. We put them all together and give you really the tools for which to choose your foods best for the rest of your life. And I think that's what we're trying to do with everybody, is change the way people think about food forever, because the food choices you make are the best tools you have to improve your health. And I think that's a message that doesn't get across enough. And we all have that power. We just need to be educated. And Zoe provides that. And if you haven't got the money for those tests, we have a great podcast as well, which informs about nutrition, called Zoe Science and Nutrition. And there's lots of other ways of just listening to me on Instagram, etc., to get a lot of these tips. So we need to start educating the world. And I know you guys have already been doing that as well. So it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, you're brilliant. You really are. I really admire your work. You're fabulous. Look forward to meeting you. Cheers,
Bye,
Tim.
guys.
Bye.
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 Cheers.
Bye. Lovely to meet you. Thanks again.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.